Hello. So today I wanted to talk about happiness and what happiness is, because I feel like it's like such a very misunderstood concept, and I feel like oftentimes it becomes very convoluted. So today I kind of just want to just talk about it so that you can actually have a clear target. My journey with happiness started when, well, like I think everyone is on the journey of happiness, and so but it's kind of interesting because I was listening to an audiobook by Jim Rohn, and I forget what it was called, but in there he said something really interesting. He said that if you want to get good at something, then you should study it. So if you want to get good at exercise, you should study exercise. And if you want to get good at happiness, you should study happiness, and so on and so forth. And I was like, wow, this is a great idea. And it's kind of interesting. In some ways, we all know that, but sometimes when we hear something, it really comes into our consciousness, and this was actually one of those moments. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Really, I should study it. And so that's actually when I started consciously really studying a lot of different subjects, even outside of my like main interests, such as spirituality, such as cultivation, and things like that. Those were my main interests. But really, actually, I started realizing, you know what? I shouldn't just kind of dilly-dally or become be a dilettante, but I should really study it. And so I started studying what happiness is from my own personal experience, and actually also what the studies say. And it was kind of interesting. So like today what I want to tell you is kind of like the best summary of what happiness is from everything I've gathered and from working with myself and all the people to this point that I found to be just effective over and over again. The things that I find that they're actually basically true for everyone and that doesn't have any exceptions, and that just really makes sense. That's really supported by research and also by experience. And so from that perspective, what is happiness? And I'd like to just divide it into just three components, because I think that really there's just only three components to happiness. And if you understand that, then I feel like it becomes a lot easier to be able to achieve happiness because you have a clear target. And I feel like if you don't have a clear target, how can you hit the target, right? And so the same thing with happiness. So I'd like to say that happiness has three components: being present, and then having your needs met, and then last, being able to have good pain management. And this last one is actually kind of an interesting thing because most of the time it's actually not seen as this, but really just really three things: having being present, having your needs met, and then a good pain management system. And so what does it mean? What do I really mean by these three things? And so research has shown over and over again that one of the best predictors of someone being happy is whether they're present or not. And so they did this research where they would get these texts, there's been a lot of these researchers. It's actually sometimes text, phone calls, or actually through apps like writing in. But basically, they basically ask, "What are you doing?" and like what's happening with you, and so on and so forth. And after going through that, it wasn't just any particular activity. It was actually whether people were present with what they were doing or not. When people were present with what they were doing, they were happy. And if you really think about it, that really makes sense because if you divide it, in that moment, if you divide it and like you're like worrying or you're thinking about it and you're not really present with what you're doing, that means that you're resisting the moment. And that's not a pleasant experience. And so, one way of knowing whether you're happy or not in that moment is: are you present? Are you present? And it's thinking is not bad. If you're present with your thoughts, you're perfectly you're perfectly good. If you want to be thinking and you're thinking, that's happiness. I will oftentimes actually just sit and think. And actually, if my thinking is really good, I'll actually just write it out or I'll even speak into an audio. But the difference is I'm present with it. When it's not good is when you're trying to do something and your mind is just somewhere else because you don't want to be here. Now that is torture, right? So being present. And so if you're present, you're enjoying what you're doing. You're focused, there's just a natural enjoyment. And and that's one of the reasons people have found out that meditation is so powerful because If you're meditating, then that means that you learn how to be present. And if you learn to be present, even when you're with something unpleasant, you learn how to be present with that, right? So that's the one thing, the first thing, just being present. And so it's a kind of a good marker. And I could just say, and put that first, because I could just say that that's really all there is. Even in your death, if you can just be present with yourself and actually with those around you and actually with the divine, or if you will, the universe, just being present in this present moment with all that is, and you feel connected to it, you're good. And so just being present. Now the second one is needs. And I think this is actually where most people actually struggle with, because I think people typically confuse their needs and their strategies. Strategies are what you do to get your needs. The most common thing I say is that when people want a sense of home, a big sense of home, then they go for a big house because, like kind of big sense of home, big house. But then oftentimes they lose their sense of home because they become a slave to the home of having to clean it and the upkeep. And if you have a bigger house, there's more to do, more money. And all of a sudden now you're having to work harder to maintain that house instead of actually having a sense of home. When in fact, actually, if you had gotten a small house, then maybe your needs would have been met better, because you would have had less to focus on the house itself and more on the sense of home. Now, having said that, that's not for everyone. Some people genuinely want a bigger house because their sense of home is better met by having a bigger house. And so that really depends. But the point I'm trying to make is that most people confuse what a strategy is and what a need is. A need is actually a feeling that you get. And it's a sense of hunger. It's a sense of, a desire for intimacy. Like when you, let's say, for instance, want to go out and hang out with your friends, your need is probably a desire to connect, right? That's a need. And we don't realize how extensive our needs are. So whenever we talk about needs, I typically say it's got to be an ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem of needs. And one of the ones that's easy to demonstrate is what's called the Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And I'd like to recommend that you go up, if you don't know what that is, go up in the internet and type in Maslow Hierarchy of Needs. And so, Maslow basically organized the hierarchy of needs, where they said that in the bottom rung of your hierarchy of needs is called physical needs. Those are like your functional needs, physical. And then it's like are you eating? Like, are you hungry or not hungry? With sex, like, are you feeling horny or not horny? Like sleep, are you getting enough sleep or not? So like the most fundamental thing. It's like from moment to moment, if you will. The rung above this is called security. And that's basically, do you know when you're going to get your next meal? Do you have a roof over your house? So that's actually not from moment to moment, but that's kind of more of a longer term systematic solution, like having a routine, like having rules, having resources where you can predict the resources. So it's about predictability. So that's called security. And then above that comes belonging. So now, if you know when your next meal is gonna come, then you can focus on the relationships. And so that's like, do I belong? Do I not belong? It's about vulnerability. It's about belonging. And do I have people that are loyal to me? So belonging. And then above this called self-esteem. So if you're healthy, if you're reasonably healthy, and you have a reasonably good routine, and you know how the rules work, the rules of the game, and you have enough resources, and that they'll be coming, then the next thing that you look at is, like, do I have the relationship support me? And if you have the relationships to support you, then you want to see how hard you can push and how far you can go and how well you can succeed, right? So that's what comes next. And so now that's called the esteem rung. And that's actually where you find your role in society. You learn how, whether you can get recognized, and where your limitations are. Like, and you push to see, we don't realize this, but we push to see whether we can find our limitations. Now, once we find that, then actually we kind of feel, like, as we are working really hard and we push ourselves to the limit, we start wondering, is this what life is about? It can't be. What is really life about? What's the meaning of life? And we start actually asking this question: what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? And it's not that we don't ask this before, but it's really becomes pertinent at that point. And that's about purpose. And once you know why you're here and what life is about, and that's called self-actualization. Once you reach that rung, after that, when you start like knowing, why you're here, then you start living that that purpose, and you start relaxing into your being. And as you start relaxing into your being, your very being becomes service, because you're no longer a burden to anyone, because you know what you're about. You're no longer competing or comparing yourself, but at this point you can transcend yourself, because you're no longer being held up by yourself. You're no longer being limited by yourself. And so now you start relaxing, and then you can just be, and you can serve, and you can just be present with someone else. Now, the interesting thing is that these hierarchy of needs, it's an ecosystem. It's not like you need to take care of the bottom one first before the next. They're actually all present. They're needs. So your desire to serve is present right now. Your desire for your purpose is present right now. Your desire to really push yourself to your limit and grow and be your best is right now. Your desire to actually have really good intimate relationships and loyal people in your life is right now. Your desire to have a good routine, know the rules of engagement, and be able to have enough resources and know that you can expect them, that's right now. And then everything needs to function right now and be in balance. And so this actually comes to the subject of balance. So when you're talking about needs, really you want your system to be in balance, because when your system is in balance, you're happy. Like for instance, a lot of people chase after excitement, and the reason they're chasing after excitement is because the life is miserable, because the needs are not being met. This hierarchy of needs, this ecosystem is not being met, and so you need some way to distract yourself from the pain of your system being imbalanced. And so nowadays I've read something that's called revenge bedtime procrastination, where you feel like you haven't really lived your life. So you're trying to kind of claim your life later. And so you stay up later than you should. And you start like watching, YouTube or movies, or you're on social media, or you just kind of binge on shows and things like that. And the reason is because you're trying to have a sense of life. You're trying to have some excitement, something that fulfills you. And oftentimes, actually, we start going after what's called super stimulants, something that gives us excitement. But really, what it does is it brings us to an aroused state where a system is excited. And so when your system is excited, it's actually kind of slightly in an emergency state. And so because of that, you can feel underneath that your system is really imbalanced, and you're not feeling so good, and that you're using that as a pain management system. So now it's interesting. So the more you pursue excitement, the more your system becomes out of balance. So what I tell people is like, in general, you want 80% balance and 20% excitement. It's not that excitement is bad. Excitement is very important, actually. But what you want is, you want to have a balanced system where you feel good, you feel, relaxed, and you feel alert and awake, and your body feels good, and you feel kind of nice and warm and energized. And there, you, from out of that stillness, creativity and inspiration arises, right? And that's a really good model, where, inspiration arises out of that stillness, or out of that good sense of balance, out of that flow. And so balance means that it's a sense of flow. It feels like everything is just flowing. It just feels good. And it kind of feels like you're in the zone. And so just your balanced state actually feels great. And then from there, you have inspired aha moments that just takes you to the peak. And so, but those peak moments are exhausting. And if you've ever had really just high moments, like maybe graduation, if you had a good graduation, or you had a great party, or like really high moments, or you had a really intimate moment with someone, and you just talked into the night, the next day you're going to be wiped out. It's not sustainable. And so what you want is, you want a certain amount of excitement that is in proper balance to your balanced state. And so you want to find a balanced balance to excitement ratio. For some people, it can be 60% balance and 40% excitement. And but for a lot of people, it's between 70 and 80% balance to 20 and 30% excitement. And all you need to really think about is imagine you flip the ratio where it's 80% excitement and 20% balance. Most likely, the moment you think about that, you're like, oh, if I have to be excited 80% of the time and then 20% of the time balance, that sounds terrible. And that's most people's reaction. If you don't fall into this, most likely your system is imbalanced. And so, as I said, we use excitement to uh, manage our pain. And so, what is a proper way of managing our pain in that case? And so that's why I call pain management. It really, actually, it goes under a different name. In reality, it's really the ability to be able to pursue, to be vulnerable or pursue vulnerability, because most people don't think about this, but your needs are super vulnerable. Because if you, and so we form attachment around our needs, and the reason is because these are the things that you require to have a balanced system, right? A balanced ecosystem. And that's actually just naturally what we want. We're part of nature. Nature is always trying to balance itself, right? And so imagine not being able to have the things that would balance you. Imagine that you can never get touch, or imagine that you can never get intimacy, or imagine that you can never get the food that makes you feel good. Imagine that you have to be hungry. Like, none of these sound good. And imagine that you have no significance, that you cannot grow, or that you're not allowed to grow. Imagine that you always have to hold back. Imagine that you feel that you'll never, be able to achieve your purpose, or that you'll never be able to serve or just be. Imagine that you feel like you're too much or not enough. And as I say these things, you'll notice that, oh, wow, like, yeah, like not having your needs met is super vulnerable. And so to be able to go after your needs, especially when they haven't been met, is a really vulnerable thing. And so, let's say, for instance, like in my case, I didn't realize this, but I enjoy speaking. And so, but I used to be shy. There was a moment in my life where I was shy, and I was really afraid to look bad and make mistakes, which I feel like is like really common with people. And so I was torn. I had this desire to talk, but then I also had this desire not to make mistakes, and to try and go for what I want was really vulnerable. And a lot of us experience that. To really go for what we want, it's really vulnerable. And so we need a system that allows us to actually really be able to deal with vulnerability. And the way most of us deal with it is by trying to not feel the pain, if you will, or the need, because vulnerability is painful. So this is actually where a lot of the sayings come, where you probably heard, pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. This is actually really what we're talking about, because when you're going after your needs, it is going to feel very vulnerable. It's going to feel bad. You're gonna feel really attached. And non-attachment is an interesting thing. Non-attachment, at the most basic level, is to realize that you feel really attached to having what you want, and understanding that you cannot control the outcome, that you can't really, there's no guarantee, but then you're gonna go towards it anyways. That's actually ironically non-attachment, because you are moving forward even though you know you may not succeed, and that is uncertainty. And so in a sense, even though you're afraid of it, you're walking towards uncertainty, and walking towards uncertainty is non-attachment, because uncertainty, to embrace uncertainty, we need to let go, right? You need to let go to embrace uncertainty. And letting go is non-attachment. And so in some ways, ironically, as you actually move forward, you also embrace the very possibility you're not going to get it. And that's a very important aspect of having something. People who actually have the things that they want in their life also have embraced that they're not always going to get it. And so because they understand that, they stop looking for a way to always succeed. So they just keep going for it until they keep getting it. And so now they have the confidence that eventually they're going to get it. They just try enough times, you're gonna get it. And then as you get comfortable with trying enough times, ironically, something miraculous happens, which is you start realizing you don't need to worry. And then you relax and you start seeing better ways to get it. You become more and more efficient. And then you start actually succeeding. And those are the masters. And so we look at those people and we try and skip the middle stage, or the beginning stage and the middle stage, and we try and go straight there because it seems like that'd be possible. But it's not really possible because it's your system and your system requires something different from someone else. It's almost like, thinking that you can be someone else and have your own needs met. So you do need to walk your own journey, and that is the hero's journey. The journey towards walking towards your needs, which doesn't sound very glorious. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why people don't get it. And what most people have done is the hero's journey. Instead of walking towards your needs, which can be something very simple. And that's one of the reasons why minimalism, in my opinion, actually works so well, where you minimize everything in your life that you don't care about, and you just, that which creates more room for the things you care about. Because it's actually realized it's not about something big out there. But for most of us nowadays, because of movies and media and storytelling, I feel like have confused the issue of what a hero's journey really is. And now we're going for something epic, something grandiose, which is a strategy. Going for something grandiose is a strategy. And so by doing that, we're hoping that our needs are going to be met, because if you go for something that big, surely enough, your needs should be met. But it's actually not true. I'll give you an example of this, actually one of the most common mistakes. So a lot of times people try and make a lot of money because if you have enough resources, it seems like you can use those resources to make yourself happy. It's a reasonable assumption. What we don't realize is that to create that much resources takes a lot of work. Now, of course, we're looking for ways for it not to take that much work, and we hear about people all the time who are not putting in that much work, but they're making tons of money. And I like to say, I'm not saying that there aren't some exceptions, but they're really a very small number of exceptions. It's really, it's a really difficult thing to actually create to create a lot of resources, and it requires a lot of money. A lot of effort to create that much money. And so what we don't realize is that as we're walking towards that direction, we're gonna need to continue putting in all that effort to maintain that resource, which means that actually we're not gonna have that much time to use those resources to find out what our needs are. And if we think about stopping, you know how much effort it took to create those resources. And then you start thinking, oh, if I stop now, what if I lose all that? Because one of the things that you realize as you're starting to make those resources is that if you stop working, it's not going to stay forever. As I said, whatever you need, if you go for it, you realize you also can lose it. And so it's an exchange. It's a yin and the yang. And we don't realize that we become a slave to the resource because we don't want to lose the resources because it has potential. Like the more resources you have, it seems like you have the potential to be able to meet your needs. But we're not considering the fact that we're not going to have the time to start doing that. And so what I tell people is that, like, think about this. If you want to become, let's say, for instance, a influencer, because I think that's what a lot of people want nowadays, just imagine what you need to be able to do that. You need to actually be able to generate material consistently. And if you read, you'll find out a lot of people who are trying to be influencers are stressing out because they need to keep generating material that's fresh. And they're burning out because they're trying to put something out on a daily basis, or something like very often enough. And so that's one stress, just one. The other one is you need to get the right equipment. You need to learn how to use the equipment. You need to have potentially, actually, ideally, people that can help you. If not, then that's also a lot of actually work. You need to actually be able to edit, or at least minimally. You need to actually understand how lighting works and how the camera works. And you need to understand a little bit about how to, like, what typically works and not doesn't work in terms of like media and wording and things like that. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot that goes into it. And so essentially, the people who started it that I've talked to, they're like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's a lot of work. And so, it seems like it. But when people talk, they say, oh, you know what, just put up something on YouTube and just do something you enjoy. And I'd like to say it may have started with something you enjoy, but once you start doing it, a job's a job. It's probably one of the most, was probably one of the best things I've actually ever learned, that there's no job that doesn't require effort. And if there is one, it is the exception. And once in a while, people fall into it. It's called a niche. It's something that really is so unique that it's very difficult to replace just naturally. But how often does it happen? Not very often. And so looking for something like that is actually not a good idea. Actually, instead, looking for something that is easy for you to do comparatively to other people that you can continue doing, that's really actually the way to go. So, but anyway, so that's kind of about like the resources pain. And so pain management. So a lot of times we actually try and do things that would make it easier for us and not feel vulnerability. And one of the strategies that we come up with is to basically make a lot of money and like basically have all these resources so that we can have our needs met. In reality, actually, when all you want to do is some simple things that you find that you really are afraid that where you're gonna find rejection, whatever it is, maybe play music in front of people. It can be very simple. Maybe learn how to dance. It can really be very simple things. And nowadays, to the social norm of what people want, it seems like not enough. And that is very vulnerable to feel. And so that's why I say pain management. And so if you can actually be present, so now being present, be present with your pain, with your vulnerability, and distinguish it from the strategy. Okay, I'm trying to do this, but why am I trying to do this? And you're like, oh, it's because I want to feel these things. Ah, what can I do immediately that would allow me to feel these things? Oh, I could just do this. Oh, but you know what? I don't feel ready. You know what? Let me do this instead. Let me make money, or let me do this so I can prepare myself. Maybe I can prepare. Instead of just doing what you want to do, you try and prepare yourself. And so a lot of people, instead of doing what they love, they spend a lot of time preparing themselves as I've been describing, and then that's what derails us. And we think of that as preparing, but we're still not facing vulnerability. We use uh, excitement to try and distract ourselves from what we want. Yet, in this entire time, you're not going for what you want. And so I tell people that you have the choice of uh, going for what you want and feeling the pain of going for what you want, or you have the choice of not being who you are and feeling that pain. But either way, you're going to feel pain. And so that's called acceptance. So accepting who you are, and the risk of that is acceptance. Is if you're present, you can accept. And if you accept, then you can feel gratitude for who you are, actually, ironically. And if you feel gratitude, then actually out of that comes joy. And so you need this pain management system. So if I kind of wrap up what happiness is, you can recognize happiness by how much you're present with your own life. And if you're not much present, that means that your needs are not being met. And if you think about your needs, you need to kind of think about your ecosystem of needs. And once you recognize what your needs are, and you just need to recognize one by one, then you need a way to manage your vulnerability or your pain of walking towards your needs, step by step, little bit by little bit. As I always say, slow is fast, small is great, less is more. Why? Because as you do that, you're going to really come into contact with what's important to you. But that's really vulnerable. And that vulnerability, as you accept yourself as you are, and as you accept that you're going to fail, and as you accept you're going to be in pain as you pursue it, but that it's better than the pain of not going for what you want. as you accept the pain, out of that is going to come gratitude. Gratitude for yourself that you're doing this. And as you start having some successes of being who you are, you're going to start feeling joy. So, okay. Hopefully that kind of gave you an overall idea of what happiness is. Thank you for listening.